Okay, Mike, thank you so much for joining me on this. And I just couldn't let the experience pass by without talking to you, getting your expertise. I have really been surprised about what a food scientist is, what a person who takes care of this kind of business. I am just surprised all that it takes to get into this. So I wanted to hear from you a little bit about how you did, what made you get into this field. I know that you have another family member that was a previous CSU, so I guess that kind of helped you decide where to go to. But if you just give me a little bit of background, I'd love it.
Yeah, absolutely, Michelle. Pleasure to be here with you. My mom actually studied nutrition back at CSU. What would it be? More than that. So it's 20 years for me. So about 35 years ago, and so within that, we always grew up eating nutritious meals. She would always kind of talk about some of the different components of nutrition. And I was one of those weird kids, even like through junior high and high school, like nutrition science like fascinated me. And it wasn't until I was studying nutrition, I was actually full intent of like being, I don't know, like a cruise nutrition director. So I was actually double majoring in exercise sports science and human nutrition. And I had an advisor that came to me one time and she said, "Hey, have you considered food science?" And I said, "I've never heard of food science before in my life." And I started looking more into it, more about the science, more about product development, more about manufacturing. And I remember as a kid, one of my favorite movies, and I have to go back and look what the title was just like there was like these small robots that went into like a big manufacturing plant. It wasn't for food.
Right.
And it was just like, and this was like 5 or 7-year-old Mike Gabel, just
Right.
like watching this and being fascinated with like manufacturing and just the ability to kind of, think about being in that, producing food on a mass scale. I mean, was intriguing to me. I think there was, back in the day on the Food Network, Unwrapped.
Yes,
if you're familiar with that.
I am.
That was about the time that I got into food science. That was really when it was big. And watching that and going like, oh, that's just like fun to see how Doritos are made or, Capri Sun, whatever else it is. It was really just fascinating for me. So, yeah, this advisor at CSU just got me on the right path and just, I haven't turned back since. It was just, a great way. Even as students, we got involved in the local, there's a professional society, the IFT, Institute of Food Technologists, and they have local gatherings. And so we went out and saw the Jolly Rancher factory used to be here in Colorado. And so we'd go down there and just see how Jolly Ranchers were being made and get like a fresh one off the line, which wasn't hard.
Love some Jolly Ranchers.
Oh, yeah, it was fascinating. So those are just like the things that just like really got me excited about food science. And then consequently, my wife actually graduated the same degree, but she was more on the nutrition side. So when you were in that, it was a food science, human nutrition degree.
Okay.
You could concentrate either in food science or in human nutrition. She was more on the nutrition side.
Okay. Well, I grew up on Chef Boyardee, and I used to joke with my mother that the only spice she knows is burnt. Pepper and burnt. So I envy having that kind of background and also realizing what you want to do at such an early age. And shout out to your advisor. That's awesome that they kind of put that out to you to help you decide. They have a hard job. Okay, I want to know about this s'mores pizza. I heard you on another podcast, and s'mores is one of my favorite things. It's the only way my husband can get me to go camping, if he promises that I can have s'mores. But I've never heard of doing a s'mores pizza. What kind of got you doing that? And is it just a every once in a while thing, or how does that work out?
Sure. Back many years ago, I had studied Italian for whatever reason in grad school, and so it was just one of those like dreams of going and living in Italy. And so at one point when we had our two oldest children, they were 3 and 1 at the time, we just went and spent a month in Italy, and it was like fascinating. And I remember going into a hardware store, I don't know why, we just, just like walking around, and they had kind of these pre-made pizza ovens. And so for the rest of my life, I thought, I'd be fascinated to have a pizza oven. I'd love to do that. And so finally, when this must have been 2012-ish, we had a house in Chicago, in the greater Chicago area, and I finally convinced my wife to build a pizza oven. So we built a pizza oven. It was just fantastic. And so this lifelong pursuit of like building the oven, but then making the Neapolitan pizzas.
Right.
And we always thought about, we'd always do like a cinnamon sugar pizza. And so at one point, I'm not sure if we stole this idea from anyone else, but we thought about this, is you take the pizza crust, and my wife would actually do like two different crusts. So we would do just a normal, just the flour, water, salt, and the yeast. And then we do like a brioche bread. So
Right.
we had the egg and the butter and everything else, and it was just great. Like the dough was like super easy to work with. And we just thought, like, let's do a s'mores pizza. So we'd, roll out the dough or stretch out the dough, put the chocolate chips in, let them melt, and you kind of put a little butter on top, just because everything with butter
Yeah.
just tastes
I
good.
mean,
So-
you can't go wrong there.
and then you get that almost like all set up, and then the marshmallows take about like 30 seconds.
Right.
The oven's like 900 degrees. And so you just gotta like put the baby marshmallows on there, and just like you do it, you get it like toasted on one side, you turn it and get it toasted on the other side. And if you wanted to, you could kind of like crumble on some graham crackers on the top, which is fascinating. Just it was a crowd favorite all the time.
Oh, yeah. I bet you went up as far as favorite parent or coolest parent when you did that.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Would you consider yourself a pizza snob?
Not so much, I don't want to repeat. I don't know if it'd be your audience friendly, but when they say pizza's like sex, when it's good, it's really good.
That's
when
right.
It's bad, it's still pretty good.
It's still pretty good. Yeah, my husband, I call him a pizza snob. He grew up right outside of New York City, so that's the pizza he loves. And every time we go, he knows he's not going to, and if he's not in New York City, he knows he's not really going to be happy, but he tells me what it's not. And I realized we lived in Huntsville, and we had a pizza company. It was just a small business, and for them to get the type of pizza, the crust, they had to get the kind of water that was in New York City.
Oh, fascinating.
So when I was thinking about that and pizza in general, this kind of goes back to what you do. What is in certain ingredients that makes things work well together, and what you could put in to kind of make the flavors not blend. Is there anything that you've really had fun kind of checking out the ingredients and seeing and playing with it?
Well, it's interesting. As a food scientist, it's always kind of that experimentation, even when you're at home doing things. I remember for a while I was on this horchata, the Mexican rice drink.
Yes.
And I was like, all right, we can do this and this. And I was remembering like the cinnamon would always float to the top. And I was like, well, as a food scientist, I know I can get like a cinnamon extract that's soluble in water. And
Right.
So,
Right.
experimenting with a few of those things. But yeah, even with the pizza, like I still do a few things. And I'm not like a snob by any means, but I'll experiment. Say like all-purpose flour will give me this type of pizza, whatever else. But if I use like Caputo, double O, ground
Right.
flour, whatever else, it's a completely different thing. The protein makeup's just different, so you can actually feel like the strength of the dough. And yeah, so it's all about experimentation, and things aren't going to always work out the same way too. Just funny story that I was thinking about this morning is my wife, she experiments a little bit too. So she
Right.
makes her own like homemade yogurt. And so she had this thing where she saw this online. Who knows what it is? It's like a 36-hour yogurt. And you put in like, you buy like pre-made probiotic pills. You like dissolve
Right.
some of those in there too. And so the first two batches were like good. I don't know what this is supposed to be. It's really good for gut health and
Yes.
see in the dark. And I don't know what it is. And the third batch she had was just like, it was gooey and stringy and whatever else, and we would
Woo.
not touch it.
Yes.
My wife was like, that's really good for you. I was like, I'm not going to touch this. I don't know
Yeah.
what's in there. So, it's just experimenting, and everything's just not going to work out every time, too.
It's so funny you say that, because I really wasn't into Shark Tank much before, because it broke my heart when you saw these people just, so happy, so excited about their baby that they're handing over.
Oh, absolutely.
And the sharks are exactly, they have the name for a reason. And someone last night, it was an episode from a few years ago, but it was essentially a wrap, like a heat wrap that you put around milk, and they had a packet that you would, put into the milk, and then you would put the heat pack around it and wait 30 something hours, and then you had this wonderful yogurt
Oh, fascinating.
that you could make smoothies. And that was kind of what all the sharks were concerned about, was how do you know that you're not going to kill somebody? How do you know you're letting someone else just take this heat pack and, with this milk, and what if they do something to it? And it was very creative, but, and he didn't have the bacteria also lined out. And I guess if that's something you're interested in, you want to know exactly what's in these packages. Now, you and I, this is the first time we've met, but we've talked on the phone, we've had email, because I'm actually going to be working with y'all, which I'm so excited about. And I remember the first time you and I talked, I was feeling like I've been working on this recipe for months. Somebody could ask me a question. I'm like, yes, it's 1 cup. Yes, it's this. Yes, it's that. And I was feeling really good until I had the conversation with you. And your first 2 questions, one was, have you cooked it? And I'm thinking, no, I'm not. Why would I do that? And then your second one was even worse, which was amazing. You asked me about pH. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm way out of my league. Is that common for small businesses or people like me who's got this dream, got this recipe, got this idea from, generations, and we make it up in our kitchen and we don't think about pH or, for it being shelf stable in the way that it needs to be, because a lot of this is being made and sitting there. So I guess my question with all that being said is that normal?
Oh, it's 100% normal, Michelle.
Okay.
It's one of those things that most people are focused on, and this is what we kind of say the difference between like a chef or like a home cook versus like a food scientist is that, when you're making something, you're usually making it for immediate consumption.
Right.
And so you're making it, and so you might have had grandma's recipe, or you might have had something that you perfected over the years, and someone's going to eat it at that point. And so a food scientist is really looking at preservation. And preservation kind of gets a bad rap, but really we think about that, the supply chain of the world today really kind of runs on having a factory that can distribute out to a lot of different places and
right.
have a shelf life of, for refrigerated up to like 60 days probably, or like a year if it's shelf stable.
Exactly.
And so you have to start thinking about some of those considerations. It's going like, all right, yes, this tastes great day one, whatever else. How am I going to make it taste good here in 9 months?
Right.
And so we start to talk about, and there's a lot of things that FDA regulates, and that's why I ask about pH. There's certain things that, and for some people, pH, it goes back to like high school chemistry.
Yes.
There's a little bit of a trigger there.
Yes.
All right. But, there's just different things that over the years, we've been manufacturing, processing foods for, centuries now. And so we understand what's going to make you sick and what's not going to. And so a lot of those considerations really come down to like, all right, you might have not have considered this. And this is
right.
just a blind spot that a lot of people have. And it's not a bad thing either. And most of the things we're not talking are complex, they're not rocket science, but just
right.
like, all right, we need to have a certain pH to make sure that we don't have to do a specialized process. If you're under a certain pH, then it's just a quick like pasteurization, just like milk does. Heat it
right.
up to a certain spot, you kill off everything. But if it's above a certain pH, then you have to like go through a big like steam, pressure. It's really not small maker friendly
right.
process.
Well, and you said something intriguing when we were talking about heating up the batch, and you said get it up to the certain degree, put it in your bottle, turn it upside down, let the top, let your cap get the heat, so that way it's sanitized. I mean, all of this was so it was awesome to hear, but it was a little scary because that's when I realized, whoa, as a inventor, whatever you want to call us. Mm-hmm. You get stuck in the minutia sometimes of, well, not minutia as far as taste, because it has to taste good. Right. But then what kind of bottle? What does the label look like? Your logo, getting it out, and you don't think about these things, and it's exciting because it's a whole new world.
100%.
And if you don't know everything, it almost helps, because if you did know all of these things, you might get kind of in that analysis paralysis where it's so overwhelming. And so it's so nice to have a place like this and the Innovation Center, which I'd like for you to talk about. Your scientists are amazing. When I talked to Kate, she was so helpful and made it sound fun, mm-hmm. because you get to a point where you get your recipe and then it goes down. You got it perfect and you've done something, and then all of a sudden it doesn't taste well. The way she describes going into the kitchen and working was it sounded so fun and enlightening. So tell me about the Innovation Center and how that works and how people come to you. How do they find you?
Oh, yeah. So our Food Innovation Center is here at CSU Spur. So it's a brand new campus that Colorado State University has in downtown Denver. And so it's a very different type of campus. It's not where you'll see a lot of college students. It's more open to it's more of like a community center mixed with a science center, mixed with, a lot of just different research going on and a lot of different programs that exist here. I mean, you can go and see equine-assisted therapy. You can go see a vet clinic. You can see operations happening real time. You can have our Food Innovation Center, which has, a big commercial kitchen and a couple of different processing labs, a dairy lab, Kate is our food scientist, or senior food scientist, is a chocolate expert, so she has a little chocolate lab.
I knew we were liking each other for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's a whole bunch of different things. We have an amazing greenhouse. Hydro, the building we're in right now, is all about it's all about water and water conservation. So we have a water processing lab. And so there's just a lot of different things. What this is really meant to be is a place for a K through 12 group, school groups go through on a field trip and really experience and see the day in the life of a food scientist,
Nice.
a plant pathologist. And we're just finding that, 2/3 of Colorado high school seniors are not considering college.
Right.
And so we just want to get them excited, make learning fun. And so part of that is our Food Innovation Center really is, somewhat community focused and education focused, but a lot of it is just client focused, industry focused. And that's especially around smaller brands that are just like, startups. You have Grandma's Recipe, or it could be, someone that has maybe been out for a couple of years and they just have something like my shelf life's just stopped working out.
Right.
You just need some assistance. A lot of times you were talking about like food safety. Am I going to kill somebody?
Right.
You get those calls all the time.
Yes.
They're like, hey, I'm doing this. And we go like, all right. We ask the same questions. What's your pH? Are you pasteurizing this? Whatever. I was like, we're doing all that. I'm just like, you are good. You're safe. They just need that reassurance.
Absolutely.
From, a scientist that has gone through this. And so we're, our team consists of a handful of food scientists. So Kate, who's our senior food scientist, expert in fermentation and chocolate. Rachel Waller is one of our junior food scientists, and she has a brewing background. Martha Calvert is a sensory scientist, and so she focuses on taste testing, everything from focus groups to like a trained sensory panel. We have a space over across in our building that has like a just tasting boost where they'll slide through things from the kitchen. You'll taste like, 3 different samples and say like, all right, I like A,
right.
B, but in C. Or maybe there's a difference. Maybe someone's like trying to go to a different supplier for an ingredient.
Right.
And so like I can't tell the difference between the 2 different samples.
Right.
And then we have an ops manager, Nick Trujillo. He has a background in vegan snacks and seafood and acidified foods, barbecue sauces and jams and jellies and different things like that. And then we have a handful of technicians that are just with us too. So a pretty robust team.
Wow.
And
yeah, you've got it all covered.
It's great.
We
love meeting with clients. A lot of people just come in, just either they kind of work with us for a day or just like, turn over the whole product development.
Right.
And like I've launched brands before. I just need a scientist. Here's my idea. And then we just kind of work on it for a few months and get them, keep sending them different prototypes back and say, hey, what do you think? And so we'll just kind of keep going through that iterative process until they get a working prototype.
So if someone like me who has, several recipes and they've got one that's not quite working out for whatever reason, the flavors aren't melding together, they would use the taste test to kind of have the different flavors. Is that how it usually, or is it bigger companies that come in and use the...
Most of the time, just because you're probably the best, dictate of like how your product should taste.
Right.
Else. And so a lot of the time, you don't need that fine tuning when you're in the early stages. We always talk about sensory as a tool, mainly for bigger companies. It's a little bit of cost prohibitiveness built into that, just because you're paying a panelist to come in and try things, whatever else. And so we're talking up into like, the $5,000 to $10,000 range,
right.
which, for a smaller company can be a big cost. And so,
right.
And usually we say, maybe it's not you making all the decisions, but like share it out with your friends and families and neighbors and stuff and say, hey, try some of these things that I'm telling you. Tell me, get some feedback.
Right.
Because, and that's what you want to do. Most of the time people just have feedback from, your cousin and somebody at a farmer's market.
Right.
So you need something like an unbiased, external opinion, someone that's going to tell you, without looking at your face, what's wrong with this.
Exactly.
It's too salty or just don't like the flavor. Something's off.
Yeah, I've got people where nobody's really coming to my house anymore because as soon as they knock on the door, I yank them in, I drag them to the kitchen, kicking and screaming, because they know first they're going to have to taste it and their face is going to be looking at me. Right. And then they're going to have to explain why their face is that way or if they like it. And then I'm still like, no, tell me. Right. So, you see who your real friends when you're doing something like this. Okay, higher learning. What would you say? You said, I'm sorry, it was 80. How many percent of Coloradians?
2/3.
2/3.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know why that is?
I think it's just, we talk and our chancellor, so Tony Frank, the chancellor of the Colorado State University system. And so we have, a campus here, the new campus here in Spur. We have our main campus in Fort Collins, and we have a Pueblo campus. And we actually have an online program too. And what they have found is there's certain narratives that kind of hang over higher education, that college is too expensive,
right.
You run up too much debt. And they actually pulled and did some things, and they actually said, people think college is twice the amount that it actually is. And most schools across the U.S. have programs for lower income. It should not be a barrier. And it usually isn't a barrier, but people kind of have that narrative in their head. And then as far as the debt things portion goes, they always say people think you're going to come out of school with about 4 times more than you actually do.
Right.
And so I think we are trying, part of our purpose here is to dispel a lot of these, misinformation, and really to get people saying like, all right, there is a pathway for you here. There's so many different avenues that you can go down. You can find something that you're passionate about. Are you passionate about food? Are you passionate about animals? Are you passionate about, engineering or whatever else that it looks like?
Well, and seeing, like you said before, seeing someone working with horses and helping. When I was getting out of my car, I saw a gentleman helping, I'm assuming his wife or whatnot, in a wheelchair. So they were coming to maybe look at therapy, or I'm not sure, but it was so exciting because as I grew up in southern Alabama, there wasn't a lot of, my father worked at Farley Nuclear, so we could go there and do some looking around. They had a robot one time, but we would always joke, don't get too close because, you might start glowing. So we didn't have a lot of that to really put your hands on, because when someone says, I'm a vet, I'm a doctor, I'm a this, there are things that conjure up in your mind, but it's so far from the truth. I know I heard you one time say that a lot of people, even the, diagrams or pictures of a food scientist is with a lab coat on. And you're right, because that's how I kind of see it. But everybody that I've worked with and talked to here are so much more relaxed than that. They don't have like the pocket protect, that kind of thing. So that's, I think, beneficial, and to help people, they can see themselves in whatever career that they get excited about when they come here.
Right. Yeah, it's funny because there, the images on Google. There was one, and aside from even the lab jack, there's one where I think they have a piece of fruit and they have a syringe, like a jack.
Oh yeah.
Like, wow, this is too far off. Or most of them are looking at something under a microscope, and I don't think I've ever used a microscope. There might be some people looking at a microscope, but a lot of the times we're doing things that you would do in your home kitchen. We're taking ingredients and we're just kind of making it into a final product, and we're going to be using maybe processes that are a little more, industrial. And most of the ingredients are going to be, a little more B2B ingredients, business, there's an ingredient supplier that's going to sell it directly. They don't sell it to the grocery stores or in the retail format. But again, like cornstarch, you can buy like 2 different types of cornstarch in the supermarket. We can have a library of like 40 different cornstarch.
Right.
One's that'll thicken when it's cold, one's that'll thicken or meant for like frozen products. So when they thaw out, they're not going to weep everywhere. And so just different things like that. And it's pretty fascinating to see kind of the food industry. And again, we get a bad rap sometimes, but a lot of it really is to, we're making food for the masses. We're making sure that people can be fed. And yes, we can probably do a better job, most of the time. And it's, I always say it's not the scientists usually that kind of dictate what's going on in the market. And unfortunately, we usually give people what they want.
Exactly.
I've worked in enough brands that we have always had like a healthy line, a healthy this, or, a low calorie this, or better for you, whatever else that it looks like. And they just don't sell, unfortunately.
Yeah, the palate, the taste. I know I was gluten-free for a while, years, and you finally get used to it. It doesn't have the thickness and the, on your palate, but you get kind of used to it. And then we would make something and be excited about, like, it almost tastes like, and then, you watch somebody and they're like, it does not even come close to tasting like this. So I think I was diagnosed with celiac about a month before Thanksgiving, and I came up with this wonderful idea to make a pie with beans, pinto beans or whatnot, and it was the worst, any kind of pie, and my poor kids were trying to be nice about it, but it was pretty bad. So it is hard when you're changing diets, changing what Americans are used to.
Absolutely.
So, okay. What is something that when you got into this field you were expecting and it didn't happen, or it was even better than what you were expecting?
Ooh, I just have really enjoyed meeting the different people in the industry. Food scientists are all kind of pretty down to earth.
Right.
They're kind of introverted like myself. They
Right.
just prefer to be in the kitchen doing their own things. And I've just been amazed at all the different people that I've met across, and it's just kind of fun to meet some of these people. I had a friend that went into ice cream product development, and that's just kind of fun.
That is definitely fun.
And it's fun to hear about some of these projects, that I had another coworker that he worked on Cheerios for like a dozen years. And he said, like what research or development is really happening with Cheerios? And I remember him saying like, well, it was called the unsinkable O. And so we worked on like years just trying to make sure that they were always
They stay. Well, and they have a lot of flavors too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
now
yeah.
you're seeing a lot more come out, and the line extension, the different things, and yeah, it's fascinating. So I've just enjoyed the people working for wonderful companies too. The food companies aren't getting, they do all right, but they're not
Right.
getting ultra rich. They're not a software company by any means, and it's just been good to get out there and talk to people, and you can give people, the food that nourishes their families, and to connect with people. I think that's how you connect. We kind of miss that nowadays, and America is connecting around the table, but that really is what food is supposed to do. Is
Absolutely. Yeah. You worked for Barilla,
Mm-hmm.
which took you to Italy.
You did.
And what was that experience like? Did you take it because you possibly were going to Italy and kind of get out of, the norm?
It was one of those. It was interesting actually. The way this happened was my second job was with ConAgra Foods. And so I was working on the Healthy Choice brand, and it was great, and I had a great time there. I remember seeing this job posting come up for a position overseas in Parma, Italy, and I applied for it, and I said, okay, this is great. I was
Right.
excited about it. And apparently, it went all the way up to the top to the chief R&D officer of Barilla that was in Italy. And he said, well, we actually need a person in our Chicago office. And so they forwarded my resume on to Chicago, and I got hired there. It was fascinating. I even came on, I remember talking to the manager, said, hey, is there any opportunity for me to go overseas?
Right.
Yeah, why not? Whatever else. And I worked there in Chicago for about 6 years, and the whole time HR kept saying, no, there's probably not a chance. It's not realistic. It's harder. They had a lot of expats coming from Italy to the U.S.,
Right.
which was just easier to set up. They said just for the American to go to Italy, it just wasn't going to happen. And then finally, at one point, we had actually gone to Italy on a business trip. I took my whole family there, whatever else. We drove around and said, hey, this might be the only time that we're together as a family in Italy. And so
Right.
we drove around, rented like this big minivan, and just drove a whole bunch of different places. I think it was like 2 weeks after we got back, my boss pulled me in the office and said, hey, there's an opening that's there in Italy. You have 48 hours to let me know if you want to take it.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, there was a lot of, talking to the kids about it. We had a couple that were in middle school and said, no, we're absolutely not going, whatever else. And one of the kids came, actually, our oldest daughter said, she was talking to a friend and said, like, when you're an old grandma and you're thinking back, he said, I didn't go to Italy because I didn't want to. How much regret will we have?
What a wise friend.
Exactly. And then, our third oldest daughter, she said, well, as long as you guys are all going, I'm going to go too. And we all had great opportunity. Yeah, it was fantastic. It took about a year for us to process all the visa application, different things like
Right.
that. They really, if you've heard of the Italian bureaucracy, it's real, it exists.
Yes.
And we got there, and it was a huge culture shock in a lot of ways. I mean, when you visit there, it's a whole different from like visiting Italy. Italy's wonderful
Right.
to visit, and it's not. I'm not going to say it's horrible to live there, but there's just a lot of hoops you have to jump through initially. And there was just dumb things that just were just funny, retroactively looking at it. There was just things that like the thermostat actually even controls like the water, your shower water temperature. And I remember we were in the summertime going like, all right, we're just going to shut this button off on the wall there,
Right.
thermostat, but we're also like, we can't figure out why our water, like why we're having cold showers. We just didn't make that connection at all.
Right. Right.
And we had a technician come out, whatever else. He was like, he just pushed the button on and
It's
go,
like,
there you go.
There you go. This is how it works around here. I have in my mind, and I don't know if this is true, if Italians take off, they for lunch longer times, or they don't. work as not as hard as us, but maybe as long. They put family or eating together around the table. They put it more of a priority. Is that a true statement?
The Italians tend to work longer hours for whatever reason it is, or maybe not longer hours, but they're going to work right up to I think the culture's changed. I think the North American kind of style is creeped into everywhere else. And so, I mean, back in the day, they used to, it was one of those things where you just didn't leave before your boss. You stayed out there. You wanted to be the last person in the office. And so, I mean, it was like 5, 6, 7 o'clock. And it was starting to change by the time I got there.
Okay.
So 5 o'clock was kind of the quitting time. But, you weren't like taking like a 3:30 on a Friday out.
Right.
But, I would sneak out every now and then too. The work culture is a little bit different for sure.
Okay.
The communal lunch, that was the nice things too, is like there was a lot of perks working overseas, and you had an on-site cafeteria that was like, I mean, it was like a 3-course meal, and you could have everything that you wanted.
So not our cafeteria food.
Not at all. It was amazing. And then, just the vacation was just, that vacation culture was amazing. Day one, no matter if you're like, a janitor in a production line or you're, the VP of something.
Right.
You always started out with 7 weeks of vacation, which is like unheard of, and stuff.
It is.
And they would expect you. I think there was something written in the law that you had to take at some point in the year a 2-week vacation, and I'd never, ever taken a 2-week vacation previous to that. And it was great. There was, the school that my kids were at, had lots of vacations throughout the year. I had a week in May, had a week in November, had a week, and then the whole summer. And so we were out driving up to France or flying out to Prague or whatever else. It was great. So, I mean, it was just fascinating for us to be together as a family.
It sounds like a wonderful trip. How long were you there?
We were there 5 years.
5 years.
It was supposed to be 2 years and went to 3 years, and they said like 5 years. And we probably would have stayed there longer if it hadn't been for COVID.
Right.
2019, I think we had almost 30 visitors come see us, and it was just great. We loved to have people over our house and, tour them around. And then just the 2 years without having anyone come over, which like, it's time to go back.
It's hard. And as an introvert, I am one also, I didn't realize, like, I love my time at home. I love my time reading, things like that. But if my husband and I went out to a restaurant, it was the sound of people. It was the laughter. Right. I didn't need to go to parties or anything. My husband's more of an extrovert, but I truly missed it. And and I would say to him, I just need to go somewhere and see somebody else's face. Yeah. So I understand that completely. Now, I've heard you talk about a story that happened in Italy. I think you were just kind of getting into the groove, and you had put forward a project that maybe wasn't doing as good as its competitor. And what I loved about your story is it was a teaching moment for anybody else listening. If you don't mind, kind of give me the background of this story.
Yeah, so my job there was a little different. I'd done product development my whole life, and so I worked on frozen Mexican, frozen meals. I did shelf-stable meals and a lot of different things. This was the first time that I was working over the global quality. So looking at across all the different brands that Barilla has. And so overseas, it's not just the pasta and the sauce. It was, breads and cakes and biscuits and, a lot of different things. They have a whole wide bakery. And then just even in like the Nordics, they have like a flatbread. In France, that they have one of the brands is, I'm skipping the name of it. That's the largest bread chain.
Right, right.
And so within that, my job was to show the C-suite, to show like it was a family company, and so it was the families, the CEO, and all like the senior, R&D officer and marketing officer, whatever else. And so we'd sit down and we look at competitive products. And I remember, wanting to make this real, because again, feedback is how we improve. And so if you don't know how well you're doing against a competitor, or how well you're doing against something, your own internal standards, then you're really kind of blind. And there's a risk of doing that because you're pretty vulnerable.
You are.
And so I remember putting something out, and I don't remember the product, and the whole C-suite there was like, we really like this one, we don't like this one at all. And, it was the competitor versus, the Barilla product.
Right.
And it caused a lot of ripples and a lot of waves. And so everyone kind of was like, wait, what's going on here? And then I had my old boss, that was my first boss in Barilla back in Chicago, and he came to me and said, this is not how we do things. He kind of threw me under the bus.
Right.
And it was just, this was about 2 months in, so I was still, I mean, I was probably still on jet lag and everything.
Absolutely.
A family over trying to just like, I had a little bit of experience speaking Italian, whatever else, but this is a whole new language, whatever else.
Yes.
And it was a hard moment. That was just kind of probably the lowest point, in that whole experience there. But then, it was just managing those expectations, talking through whatever else, making sure that we were approaching something realistic, but not, a pathway to make it better versus, just kind of like saying like, all right, our product's crap, and
Absolutely. Yeah. Managing expectations is such a great thing to say as far as, and for budding entrepreneurs like me, having someone that has the expertise that you do and Kate does, saying, okay, this is how long it's going to take to get to shelf. This is because we all are so excited about whatever we're presenting to the world. And we think, okay, we've got a recipe. Now we just got to put it in something and here you go. But it's not that. And to have someone kind of walk you through, have the experience of it, but say you're not a failure if it takes 6 months, a year. So I think that was a valuable lesson.
And I really think it should take that long.
Right.
We're always going to talk about, even in a big multinational corporate food company, they're talking a life cycle of a product, from concept to like launch is usually at least a year, if not more, like 18 months to 24 months.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about that you really have to kind of go through a lot of the surveys to understand if, clicks with consumers and
right.
develop that out, get some prototypes out, get the flavors right. And then you're talking about logistics, you're talking about packaging, you're talking about understanding shelf life. And then just, if you have to work through the FDA, if you have to do different things, you're working on marketing materials. And so, usually you can be a little more nimble if you're a smaller brand starting up, but you still have to start thinking through a lot of these different things. Am I going to self-produce this? I'm going to go to co-manufacture. What does my packaging look like? And you can't really start thinking about shelf life until you have the right packaging.
Correct.
So then you're starting to go, okay. And, what happens when the color changes, after months, 3, whatever else, is this going to be acceptable still?
Right.
It's different considerations.
And you don't want your customers telling you that answer. Exactly. You would like to know that answer. And labeling and what you're putting in it is, as a regular consumer, when you're going, you just, whatever is appealing or you're used to using, you grab it and you don't think about all the things that it goes just to figure out the bottle shape. I'm going to be releasing a dressing, hopefully, in the next, however long it takes. And when you're looking at bottles, you in your mind, you have, that's a ketchup bottle.
Right.
That's a cocktail bottle. That's a barbecue sauce bottle. So it's so funny how it's ingrained in us, these different shapes. And should it be glass? Should it be amber glass? Mm-hmm. Should it be plastic? I mean, all those questions that you have to ask yourself, and it takes to get the product to the shelf. That is exciting as far as your side because you can answer a lot of those questions. Which one will be better for shelf life? What you're putting in there. So tell me a product that, if you can, that you were expecting it to do, to make it, but it really went, big and you were surprised. Is there one that you've had, like you were thinking, I'm not so sure about this?
Let me talk maybe generally, like broadly. I think, looking at things like a Greek yogurt,
right.
I think we all have been amazed that it just kind of took off. I remember tasting it back, this was 2000, we'll say 5-ish, whatever else. And that was before it was really big. You could maybe 5
right.
whatever else. And I had a coworker give it to me and I was like, oh, it's, sour cream. It was
right.
nothing special.
Right.
All right. And so just to see that explosion, I'm just so impressed that, and it's great because that's one of those food products that has gone a little bit away from the science.
Yes.
Which is a good thing. And let me preface this. If you looked at like a store, or even still today, like a store brand yogurt, you're going to look in there, and a lot of it is like starches and gums and different things like that.
Right.
Not that they're necessarily bad for you, but it's like covering up, some of the deficiencies of
right.
the product and stuff. And so it was funny for us as a scientist to look back and go like, all right, there are 4 thickening components. There's a pectin in here, there's modified food starch, there's xanthan, whatever else that it is. And then you look at kind of, we've come back to that real food that people are expecting. So, acai really is cultured milk,
right.
whatever. else so some if it's sweetened, have the sugar or yeah, and so it's just interesting to kind of see how that is progressing. And I talked about my wife's Greek yogurt. And She
Yes.
does an amazing job, and so it's funny to see some of those things that kind of take off. I think it's been interesting just to talk about when people talk about innovation, they talk about like the iPod and they talk about like Chobani.
Right. So that's and technology is finding its way into everything, into any discipline, and our food production is one to help us. Has there been any technology that's really helped, or it's kind of stayed steady through the entire process?
It's interesting. There's a lot of and that's the interesting part about technology is you don't see it much. And
Right.
So, for forever we've been canning things. That's just a steam retort, a big pressure cooker. That's like cooking the food when you have dehydration, you have freeze-dried things. There's a lot of new technologies, but you're probably not going to see them or understand what they are.
Right.
There's things like pulse electric field, and that's just like it's essentially electrocuting like fruits and vegetables or different things to make them peelable or maybe get juice out of them.
Oh, wow.
So maybe you'll run pomegranate through like this. You electrocute it and you kind of make micro holes in it.
Right.
And so you can extract the juice better. There's things like there's a lot of. I worked in shelf-stable mills, and so that's like the retort process. And so these are just, big things like your grandma's pressure cooker, but just on an industrial scale.
Right.
And so they've looked at different ways to, get that to be more advanced, because again, you were talking about Chef Boyardee, these are things that, they weren't great. The quality is
Right.
amazing, whatever else. But now that we're going to like flexible pouches or, a tray, it's not a can anymore. And so there's different technologies that there's like a retort, some equipment that'll actually shake it back and forth, and so the heat distributes better when versus a static tray. Or there's things that are doing like a microwave assisted pasteurization. So this is actually having microwaves that assist, because when you're heating something up, you're heating from the outside in. Microwave heats from the inside out, and so you're actually getting that benefit. So you see a lot of those different things. A lot of actually combination of the technologies. We were at a cider producer. That's just here local, and they do a UV pasteurization, and so that's just UV light, kills off a lot of bacteria, whatever else, and then they do it through a normal pasteurization, so that's just heating it up, whatever else, and so you can actually do it more gentler, and so that just seems to be like a combination of two different technologies that we have known before, and so again, things that consumers are not going to see, but the quality of the food is getting better.
Do you think that it's kind of the necessity is the mother of invention? Is it the companies, when they're trying to find better ways to do this, they're saying, hey, let's try this technology, let's try this, and that's what's bringing it to the field?
I think a lot of it too. That's a lot of the bigger industry players are looking at different technologies, say, how can we apply this? How can we do this? There's things like a vacuum fryer, and you've probably never heard of it.
I have not.
Fryer, but it just is. It actually is a lot more efficient, whatever else. You can kind of get things a lot crispier without having as much oil imparted into it, just because, and it's simple, physics of it, whatever else. You're probably not wasting as much oil, or you don't have to heat it as much because you can actually pull a vacuum on it. So there's just different, so they'll say like, all right, this technology has been invented. Let's talk to chips, manufacturers, and maybe they'll apply it to that. And I'm trying to think of some other things, but yeah, there's a lot of these that I know Barilla was really high in the forefront in a lot of the innovation, so they had like a steam oven that they do a lot of things with, and just that technology has come a long way. And so there's just a lot of different things that people are doing nowadays, applying that technology, and consumers will never see that. But again, like I said, the quality is getting a lot better. The things that we can do, you can kind of drive down the fat, like a steam oven. That was one of the great benefits, is it tastes like a full fat cake without having as much
all that fat
and everything else.
Yeah, well, and us as Americans, I guess even around the world, we're having food delivered to us a lot more. So I'm assuming technology has to kind of play a role in that because of shelf-stable temperatures, things like that. I'm assuming this is the most ever, that COVID kind of, going back to that, changed how we shop, how much we have delivered. So I'm going to go back to pizza.
Okay.
What is your favorite pizza?
Ooh, It's tough. I will tell you this much. I do like pineapple on my pizza.
Oh, so like a Hawaiian?
I do. It it was blasphemous to talk to my friends in Italy about that. There were just certain things. I gave it to them. They enjoyed it. You
Right.
know, I don't think
But they didn't admit
they
it.
didn't want to admit it. Yes.
Yes.
And but yeah, again, I will. There's not too many pizzas out there that I don't enjoy.
Okay. How about your wife? Does she have one that she?
Oh, she is more on the like the veggie pizza. She just loves like loading things up. Again, the nutrition aspect of her. So
Right.
she'll just like put as many when we're kind of prepping for making pizza at home. We'll just like she'll prep a whole bunch of different vegetables. She'll get the spinach and just the peppers and everything out. And so yeah, she'll just do a big vegetable pizza. And then my kids, they're pretty easy. They'll do anything from. We've tried a whole bunch of different ones, but we always can go back to the core. It's just
Right.
pineapple pizza and the sweet pizzas they just love too. Especially if like things are in season, we'll just like take like fresh pizzas and peaches and slice them onto the like the crust with the cinnamon sugar, and that's just amazing. If you have like a cream cheese frosting on top, it's just
Oh,
like delightful.
You're making me hungry. Yeah, I mean, that's what's so great about it is you can just change your toppings and you have a whole different flavor profile. So you can have 10 people in a room and each person can kind of have their own taste and not have 10 pots in the kitchen. Okay, let's go back to I want to ask you if you're sitting across the table for a brand new entrepreneur, what advice would you give to them and feel like they need to know?
One of the most important thing is understanding the whole process.
Okay.
Great, you have a great recipe. It's really such a small portion of having a successful product. You really need to have a community involvement. You need to have someone that's, again, a lot of people can do this themselves,
Right.
but it never hurts to have someone that, like, taking a look at your graphic design, at your packaging, at your process, at your fulfillment. A lot of that comes back down to like, all right, it's great if I can just ship this out of my garage, but there's going to be a certain point where I need to scale up and grow with this, and so I need like a third-party logistics provider.
Right.
I need to understand if my packaging is going to hold up, when I'm shipping it over, to nowhere, Kansas, right?
Right.
And so a lot of that is, getting involved with kind of a community. There's a lot of maker spaces out there that kind of, talk to food makers, and so Startup CPG is one of the ones that, just a kind of a forum board, whatever else, and they do a lot of different events too. Here we work alongside of Naturally Colorado, which is a great nonprofit that really is kind of in the natural food space, and they really have a lot of different events, pitch competitions, just networking events and educational moments where
Right.
we'll talk to people about co-packing or we'll talk to people about marketing plans. And so I think that just getting involved with the community that is around you. I think a lot of things come back down to, again, this is another kind of trigger thing is, thinking about speech,
Right.
especially us as introverts. It's like, you gotta hustle, you gotta pitch, you're gonna be talking to people. I mean, even if you start out in a farmer's market, you're still selling, you're still talking to people, you still gotta like be articulate and kind of talk to, about the highlights of your product. And so, and then, being able to pitch and get out in front of, bigger audiences, I think is amazing too. And the last thing I will tell, and I tell lots of people this, is to simplify your process.
Right.
I was looking at, was the Ferrero Rocher, that
Yes.
have like the hazelnut
Yes.
wrapped in this, wrapped in the cookie,
Yes.
wrapped in whatever else. I'm like,
Don't start off with that.
yeah, that must be a nightmare to manufacture.
Right.
So we just talk about, one of the first projects I worked on when I was here was, a gal, and she was doing, a process that was very hands-on. It was just like, it was, rolling something out between the parchment paper. You had like, this was like a chip type product, and it just seems tedious to, manufacture. It probably took 15 minutes to get, 15 chips. And so
Wow.
it was not an efficient process. And so
Right.
I know that looking at any efficiencies coming out of any of the fluff, most of the time it's going to work fine if you're self-manufacturing, but when you're asking like a co-manufacturer, you got to steep this overnight,
Right.
and like, mix this secret thing in, and that's just not going to fly, especially when you're trying to do it in scale.
I have a mentor that I'm working with, and two things that you kind of hit on. One, your product, you need to have passion for it, like anything that you do in life, because when you're sitting there trying to talk to someone at a farmer's market, at a store, anywhere, and you're trying to sell this, if you don't have passion for it and you're an introvert, you're in trouble. So because when you have passion for something, it comes out in your words and your movements. The second thing is, I know before we ever started any of the recipes, I kind of knew the step I wanted to go, how, what, and I was way too much in what steps and how many steps and how they did it. And so she had me do an SOP, which I think is standard operating procedures, and to write out and say, because if you do have a co-packer, they need to know, do you whisk it? Do you? And we would laugh because I would leave out stuff sometimes and like, okay, well, you're putting whatever in here, but you didn't even get it out of, the refrigerator, or you didn't do this, because you have to put everything down, because you've got to imagine someone who's coming in for the first day, or someone that they could just take over and do it to the quality that you want. So you do have to pay attention to your process and make sure that it's easy to understand and not too long, because you're paying for that time.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much. I want to say that when I put out this email to the team, you were the first one to say something, and you're probably the busiest. So I truly appreciate you giving us the insights and the help and the understanding of what food science is.
You're very welcome, Michelle. Happy to be here. It was a wonderful conversation. Happy to share more about my background in our center, and we are out here to help everyone.
Okay, if someone wants to get a hold of you, have questions, interested in coming to the lab, how would they do that?
They can reach directly out to me. I kind of am the gatekeeper for our center. So Michael, MICHAEL .Gabel, GABEL, at colostate.edu. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much.